Hi, you're listening to RPR's first episode of 2021. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the content. On January 6th, a mob of protesters stormed the United States Capitol, which led to 5 deaths. The protesters were able to get into the Senate chamber, the House floor, as well as Nancy Pelosi's office and other places within the Capitol. These pro-Trump rioters were angry and upset over the results of the November 2020 election and wanted to stop Congress from formalizing the election of Joe Biden as president. It was a truly wild and insane day, and I've never seen anything quite like this in my years of existence. Now, there are many questions to be asked. In such a powerful country with a strong military, surveillance systems, police, and so on, where was the law enforcement presence? Did law enforcement adequately plan for an event like this? What would be the fallout from this event? Now, these are all important questions, but I want to focus on why and how we got here and what we should do moving forward. There's a lot going on here, and it's more complex than the typical liberal narrative that paints the protesters as a mob of racist, idiotic white supremacists. There's a combination of economic factors, media polarization, and political manipulation. Even before the pandemic, you had grotesque levels of inequality, stagnant wages, 87 million plus people who were underinsured or without health insurance, critical levels of opioid addiction and mental illness. Then the pandemic exacerbated the conditions of ordinary Americans. More than 14 million Americans may have lost health care. 14% of all adults reported they didn't have enough to eat in the last 7 days. The unemployment rate for the lowest paid is assumed to be somewhere over 20%. Additionally, 30 to 40 million people are at risk for eviction because they are struggling to make rent. This is a catastrophic crisis not seen since the Great Depression. It's putting a lot of strain on individuals and families, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally as well. Moreover, our media environment is a powder keg for seemingly irrational, over-the-top, or dramatic behavior. As journalist Matt Taibbi notes, contemporary liberal and conservative outlets focus on capturing specific demographics, whereas news media several decades ago attempted to target the general population in a catch-all format. This news structure is highly profitable, which incentivizes these news networks to continue the practice. News outlets end up reinforcing, shaping, and fueling their audience's biases, feelings, and beliefs, especially when it is directed towards an outgroup like liberals versus conservatives. Media outlets are able to keep their viewers on edge with highly influential material because stories often are published without pushback or contain misleading information. These practices fuel a toxic media environment, leading to polarization and distrust. According to Pew Research, 93% of people whose main source of news is Fox identify as Republicans. 95% of those who name MSNBC as their main source identify as Democrats. Similarly, 91% of individuals who name the New York Times and 87% who list NPR as their main political news source identify as Democrats, with CNN at 79%. In terms of trustworthiness and distrust of media sources, liberals and conservatives were equally polarized among different news outlets. 70% of liberal Democrats view CNN as trustworthy, and 66% feel the same way about the New York Times. On the other hand, 77% of liberals distrust Fox News. 75% of conservative Republicans view Fox News as trustworthy, while 67% distrust CNN, 57% distrust MSNBC, and 50% do not trust the New York Times. These numbers show that we have a very polarized news environment where liberals gravitate towards outlets like NYT, CNN, or MSNBC, and conservatives go for sources like Fox News, Newsmax, Breitbart, and so on. These audiences are completely dominated and captured by their respective news sources, and it fuels the ideological divide felt by both sides. Given the polarizing and combative nature of it all, it's no surprise that some on the right genuinely felt that their side was under assault by liberals and Democrats, and they needed to go to the Capitol to voice their grievances. Now, I'm reminded of Adolph Reed's piece on nonsite.org titled Mazaki in the Moment, which is a fantastic article And this is where Adolph Reed describes the late labor leader Anthony Mazzacchi's view on politics. So I quote, Tony often observed regarding capital's revanchist attack on working people that has steadily intensified over the last 4 decades, that what we would now call the neoliberal Democrats had nothing to offer those who have been or fear being ground into the dust by the juggernaut. He cautioned that if the left and the labor movement didn't find ways to connect with that growing population of those hurting, and to offer credible explanations of the sources of their condition and plausible strategies for fighting back, other nasty, dangerous tendencies would. End quote. Now, unfortunately, Anthony Mazzacchi was right. And what better proof than the storming of the Capitol? Given the precarious situation many Americans find themselves in, along with an extremely polarized media environment that feeds and reinforces their demographics' prejudices, biases, and beliefs, it's no small wonder that something like that occurred. Many liberals, progressives, and leftists, including myself, found that the storming of the Capitol absolutely repulsive and abhorrent. To some extent, our beliefs were shaped by a headline-rich 24/7 news cycle that labeled Trump and his supporters as extreme racists, white nationalists, irrational morons, Karens, and the like for the past 4 years. Liberal news outlets constantly bombarded the airwaves with apocalyptic, over-the-top, and sometimes outlandish headlines that raised the stakes on a day-to-day basis. On the other hand, Fox News, Newsmax, and other right-wing sources poisoned the well by casting doubt on the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election and the dangers of what a Joe Biden presidency would bring: authoritarianism, a broken healthcare system, submission to Chinese interests, and rampant urban unrest. Given the siloed and closed-off nature of the liberal versus conservative media sphere, news sources were essentially driving home viewpoints that went unchallenged and were fed to a base that already supported or were receptive to those views. There was very little pushback or even self-reflection on stories that were misleading or exaggerated. For example, liberal outlets paraded Russiagate for months and months until it vanished from the media sphere overnight. Although it was challenged by people like Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Maté, or Jimmy Dore, these viewpoints never made it onto mainstream outlets like CNN or MSNBC. Similarly, Newsmax and Fox News fearmonger on the daily of the dangers of electing Democrats or socialism without bringing in historians or leftists for a counterpoint. These conservative networks questioned the legitimacy of the 2020 election results without mentioning the dozens of court cases the Trump team lost to have it overturned. As a result, elements of the right sincerely believed that the election was stolen and their livelihoods would be in jeopardy unless Donald Trump remained in office. As Mazzacchi cautioned, the weakness and fragmentation of the left, along with the unwillingness of neoliberal Democrats to address the needs and concerns of working people, have produced disastrous consequences. Donald Trump, conservatives, and the right-wing media have done a very effective job in convincing and directing their supporters' vitriol towards immigrants, so-called coastal elites, blacks, socialism, the poor, and China for the very real issues they face, like substance abuse, declining standards of living, low wages, a lack of health care, job loss, and so on. It takes a level of material precarity, anxiety, desperation, and a significant amount of media conditioning to drive someone into participating in something as drastic as the Capitol riots. As leftists, it is imperative that we focus our efforts on broadening our base, including those who supported Trump. For many liberals and even among progressives, the thought of winning Trump supporters to our side may be vomit-inducing. However, if we are to grow a movement that is effective in pressuring or affecting change, we must commit to building coalitions and relationships with people who may be initially lukewarm or apathetic to our cause. Trump increased his voter base to 74 million votes in 2020. He also increased his support among blacks and Latinos as well as gay men. Trump was able to make inroads with people who we normally do not expect to support the right. In order to broaden our base, we need to focus on items like wages, healthcare, housing, transportation, education, and so on. Issues that affect the lives of working people of every color, creed, religion, gender, and so on. By focusing directly on the issues, we build solidarity and common cause, breaking through the media narratives that keep Americans divided. Most importantly, we have to talk and connect with ordinary people, your family members, your friends, your coworkers, janitors, store clerks, teachers, nurses, etc. The election of a more competent, politically savvy, and dangerous version of Donald Trump may be in the cards if we, the left, do not present a viable counter to the right and neoliberal Democrats who have often enabled them. Although the storming of the US Capitol may seem like the culmination of a divisive, animalistic 4 years, I believe that other reckless and even dangerous events similar to January 6th will happen in the future if we do not tackle the inequalities and brutalities of neoliberal capitalism. The left must rise up to this task.